Yeah, I've never done something like this before, so this will be a fun experience.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. Next on the mic. I am so honored and happy to have Becky Borrell on my show. And I have to say that it's very funny that first, if you're watching my show, you might want to share this with someone. We were talking about a very a topic that's been talked about in Frederick, and it's all through Maryland, and that's the rapid rehousing program. And I know it's a great program, and I will tie it in on how I know it's a great program. So me and Becky worked together in Baltimore, and you were the one on the program side of how it's ran in Baltimore with the rapid rehousing program. So I was one of the rapid rehousing supervisors, and we had the money
emails.
And we went to a lot of
emails back and forth.
A lot of emails back and forth. So that's how I found out about the rapid rehousing program, and because I worked in the rapid rehousing department, and Becky is like a powerhouse when it comes to the.
That's a very specific detail to remember.
Yeah.
It was definitely one of those things where, especially like you had mentioned, I left the city and went, and I'm now working with the state, and seeing people that I worked with in the city in different capacities, it's like, I recognize that name. Is this the right person? Am I going to put my foot in my mouth by saying like, oh, hi, and then it happens to be another Tailend Thrasher. Not that there's probably that many, but
you will not meet another Tailend Thrasher. We do have a Tamika Thrasher in our area. And they always think we're related. I'm like, nah. So no, I am the one and only, probably you would never meet another Tailend Thrasher ever. So let's get on the topic. So Rebecca, tell me, how long have you been working with the rapid rehousing program in general?
So I started with Baltimore City doing coordinated entry. I was working in homeless services as a whole since 2012. And I really kind of started doing more intensive work with rapid rehousing around 2015, 2016. I would say my involvement with the program's really ramped up since then, more and more. And it's been what I used to do when I was working with Baltimore City. I would my role was operating the coordinated entry program, and so and please correct. It's one of those things like when you work in this field, there are a lot of acronyms. So
it was a lot.
So if you ever catch me using one, it's kind of like in my mind, it's like FBI, right? You don't explain what FBI is. Everyone knows what the FBI is, right? But like for me, there's all these acronyms that I use that same way, and then realize, oh wait, no, okay, not everyone,
knows the acronyms. No,
knows all the acronyms, but coordination actually is not an acronym, but it's the federal government effectively requires that programs, that local communities, what are called continuums of care. We'll go a little bit more into continuums of care in a little bit, not to bore you with all the logistics details, but have a centralized system for accessing permanent resources. So every community has one. There was one in Baltimore, one in Frederick, and it's designed to be kind of a single access point to get into housing. And the goal is that it allows for people, no matter where they're coming from, to access the same services. And so in Baltimore City, as you probably remember, there was a lot of providers. We had, I think, over 40 different, permanent housing, nonprofits that were working in this, in that world in Baltimore City. And so we were like trying to figure out, how do we create an equitable system? Because we don't want it to be a situation of like, oh, you happen to be in the shelter, you happen to know this case manager, here's your in, right? It should be a process that is centralized, streamlined, and equitable. And so when I started doing coordinated entry, it was this chance to kind of get out of the weeds of any one kind of particular program type and start thinking about the system as a whole. And that's how I learned that I love, this work is working with coordinated entry, and kind of trying to figure out what is the best way to build equitable systems. What's the best way to build systems that manage the needs for efficiency and a system that is kind of fair, centralized, and is tied to standardized best practices. So I was doing that for a very long time, and I really got into the work of rapid rehousing. And I'll be honest, when I started working with rapid rehousing, I had no clue what it was. And I think a lot of people are in that situation. It's a term that is very loaded, right? Like you don't, what is rapid, right? Is it rapid, like, a text message is rapid, like a voucher application is rapid, right? What does that mean, right? It's a very difficult to kind of, at least for me, to wrap my head around. But as you start working with the system, you start seeing different pieces of it, and I came to really appreciate what rapid rehousing was and what it does. And how it can be used to move people out of homelessness.
So I'm glad you went into that. So our viewers and some of my viewers watch it now, and then they watch it later because they're working or whatever, and they share it. Could you please tell us what rapid rehousing is?
Yes, yeah, we've been dancing around the topic. So rapid rehousing is not a program name in specific. It's really a model. And so the goal with rapid rehousing is it's a program model that recognizes that the fundamental issue at play with homelessness is a lack of adequate housing, right? When you really kind of drill down to it, it takes that assumption that a lack of adequate housing is kind of what is at the heart of homelessness. So there are a lot of contributing factors to homelessness, right? There is, that may cause someone to become homeless or may cause them to stay homeless. Can include anything from mental illness, substance abuse, criminal history, right? All of those different factors can influence whether or not somebody is experiencing homelessness. But those exacerbate someone's situation, but not everyone who is experiencing homelessness has a mental illness or substance abuse issue. And not all people with mental illness or substance abuse issues are homeless, right? And so oftentimes when program models were designed, there's a lot of assumptions about who is a person experiencing. And, if you do this work and talk with clients and people experiencing homelessness, that it is a very diverse issue. There's a lot of different types of people who have a lot of very, very different needs. And it's very challenging to design a system that can address those varying needs. And so rapid rehousing was designed as a system that looks at that fundamental barrier, which is lack of affordable housing. And if you look at trends of homelessness across the nation, right, that is one important guiding factor. The harder it is for you to find affordable housing, the higher rates of homelessness you have, right? So that's, mental illness occurs everywhere. Substance abuse occurs everywhere throughout the country. But when those intersect with housing, right, it becomes it proliferates issues with homelessness.
And I'm glad you said that, because that is what is happening in Frederick, right? Frederick is a great place to live, but then when we have our housing, and that's how I could see it happening, because if our housing is going up and we don't have enough affordable housing, the homeless population starts to grow, like you said, because they can't afford to live, so they become homeless. And so then there has to be a solution. So go ahead,
And I think it's really easy to see commonalities. What people, when you look at the homeless population, you see people who have a lot of different vulnerability factors, right, at play. But the truth is, when there's lack of affordable housing, someone is going to be squeezed out. Right. And it's usually it is usually the people who are the most vulnerable. And so that is a, correlation and not a causation necessarily. So ultimately, what everyone experiencing homelessness has in common is a lack of housing, right? It sounds very, very, very elementary, right? What is homelessness? It's a lack of housing. But I think that simplicity is at the heart of what the rapid rehousing model is designed to do. So it uses what we call a housing first approach. And housing first is a national best practice. It's been implemented for several years, and it's continuing to ramp up. It's continuing to be what the experts in housing across the nation are looking at in terms of the best ways to resolve homelessness. So the goal of the Housing First project is to basically connect individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness directly to housing, and then provide supports on the back end to make it sustainable. So if you think about it, right, let's say, you're a client and you have a couple of different issues or risk factors that are influencing your situation. Maybe you have an addiction, maybe you lack employment, maybe you have, in some cases it's one person, right? In some cases it's 15 people, in some cases it's 20 or 15 different things, 20 different things, etc. But it's really hard to start working on those things when you lack housing, right? That's like the linchpin that you start to see. And when I did more direct services myself, one of the things that I really noticed is that you encounter people when they're at their lowest of low, right? If you're working at a shelter, if you're a shelter intake worker, if you're a case manager, and someone comes to you, you are seeing them at their lowest point, usually, right? At their lowest point in life. And it's really easy to look at somebody and make assumptions about who they are by where they are when you're encountering them. And I don't want to be judged by where I was at my lowest point in life. I'm sure no one here, right? Wants to have assumptions made about you by looking at your lowest point in life. I think we've all had, different points in life where we were at our lowest. And so one of the things, it's very easy when you start working with someone to kind of have these preconceived notions in your mind. And then you find, like, when you have a roof over your head, things start falling in place, right? You have these kind of positive, you have negative feedback loops, right? Where you can, can take a punch, you can maybe take 2 punches, but that third punch, right, is a little bit more than you can handle. It creates this negative feedback loop. But with housing, you start a positive feedback loop, right? It's much easier to get a job when you have an address. It's much easier to stay in treatment when you have an address, right? It's much easier to solve all of these other issues, which may be contributing to homelessness. Maybe not, right? It's not everyone who's experiencing homelessness has the same, right? It's a combination, right? Some people just need a roof over their head and that's all they need, right?
That's all they
need. They're good to go. And there's no other barriers keeping it sustainable. So with rapid rehousing, you're basically trying to find somebody a place to live and then add those supports in order to make it sustainable. So let's kind of break down the functions of it, right? So if you were to come into the program, the first thing that would happen is a rapid rehousing case manager would meet with you, would kind of discuss your current assets and your current goals. And I think this is really important with rapid rehousing, is that it's very easy to talk about someone's deficiencies, but people don't. I don't know. At least in my experience, it's very, in care professions, we need to be talking more about people's assets as well.
And I think what you're saying is meeting them where they're at. Like, it's kind of like, focus on where they're at right now and then build from there. And that's something that is really important. Like, and I think
absolutely
case management is so important to get that.
It is. And I think one of the key things with rapid rehousing and what makes it different from other approaches towards resolving homelessness is that you don't need to have everything figured out before you get a roof over your head, right? You can have gaps, right? And so basically the housing case manager would meet with you, discuss your current assets, discuss your goals, short-term and long-term, right? I talked with a client who, wanted to go to nursing school. It's like, awesome, right? Like, that's a cool long-term goal, right? Maybe a short-term goal could be, moving more into housing, but like the fact that someone went right to, this is what I want to do with my life, that's a really exciting opportunity to see that. But also short-term goals, right? How are you going to get there? We're not looking necessarily for a place for you to live for the rest of your life. You don't have to like choose an apartment that you're going to stay in for the next 40 years. You can choose a place to stay in for 2 years and then you move on to the next thing, right? It's kind of a stepping stone to get someone to where they need to go. So the case manager, along with different programs, are structured a little bit differently depending on. But sometimes there's a case manager alongside like what's called a housing locator. Different programs have different structures to it, but the goal would be to find a rental unit that's a good fit for your short-term financial goals and work to move in. And now
say that one more time, Becky. What are you going to find? Oh, what?
Oh, sorry, a rental unit. I apologize. I kind of talk fast.
I wanted you to say that again.
Yes, I've never been on a show like this before.
It was a reason I wanted you to say that again. You need to find a rental unit.
A rental unit. Yes, it is housing based, right? And I think this is why like a rapid rehousing, like the landlord network is really important, right? So like a good rapid rehousing program provider has a very strong landlord network, right? Meets with the local landlords, knows how to work with them, considers them part of the program, even though they're independent business owners who are, who are working and renting out units, but really sees that as a core asset. So having a network of landlords finds them a rental unit that's a good fit for their short-term financial goals. I think I started the simulation by saying you, as if you were coming through well, anyway, I apologize.
No, because I understand, because I was in that process. Like I had to network with the landlords. I had to get the landlords to the table. Like it was like a process that was not, it was a partnership. They had to feel like this was a business deal. Like it was not like, oh, I'm just giving this apartment. Yeah.
Well, and this is something that I've encountered a lot with landlords, because I can sell a landlord from a citizen perspective on what is rapid rehousing. Like, I can go through what I'm going through right now in terms of, this is why this is a good program. This is why people can get, this model can get people out of homelessness, and you can get someone really invested, but ultimately if it's a bad business decision, it's a bad business decision. Right. You can be the most, you can have a landlord who's the most sympathetic person in the world to this program, but if they think this is putting them at risk, right, like that's going to be what's going to be the trump card in that equation. And so and so built into a lot of our rapid rehousing programs is landlord incentives, right?
Landlord incentives, yes.
Right, and which could be something like a double security deposit, for instance. If the landlord's nervous about a tenant that might be a little bit harder, maybe someone has criminal background, maybe somebody has maybe spotty employment history, right?
I think how we I remember how doing that was like, we would say, oh, we'll give you 3 months, like you said, the security deposit. And then when they know that, like for someone with a criminal history, when they know they have a case manager that's monitoring them, it kind of gives them a okay, it's security, like these people are just not living there and nobody's watching it, right? So you gotta show that you guys, that you're still holding their hand, walking them through the process.
Yeah, and so I think like when you go into the program, you don't need to have everything figured out, right? You don't need to have, you don't need to have financial stability, right? If we required financial stability as a condition to get into housing, then you wouldn't need housing by the time you got financial stability, right? So and that makes it very hard, right? If you're working with someone who doesn't have financial stability to, find a landlord, and that's where all those kind of incentives come in. So once a client has moved into housing, they found a unit they like, they've moved in, and that could be anything. That could be, for example, if somebody's short-term goals are like, listen, I'd love to go to nursing school, but right now, like the only thing available is a job in fast food. That's not gonna be enough to, to pay rent. The rapid rehousing program could set someone up with a roommate, right? Like that's a very common way of keeping housing more affordable. Like that's also an option, right? If that's someone's goals. But once someone actually does move in, find a unit that they are willing to live in, the program will provide two different things. So the first is ongoing rental assistance for a set period of time. Now, what's really important, especially if any listeners are interested or know someone who they might might need rapid rehousing or might be applying for rapid rehousing. The rental assistance is not for a fixed period of time necessarily. So often it is variable, and the goal is to get somebody into a rental assistant. It's to provide rental assistance and then get them to the point where that rental assistance is sustainable. But if they reach the end of it, if they go 6 months, they need an extra 3 months. Sometimes the program can provide that extra. It can be extended, but it's not like 6 months or 12 months or whatever, like as like a fix, you will get this amount. It's designed to be, it's designed after this conversation about somebody's goals, short-term, medium-term, long-term goals, and provides kind of a unique kind of tailor-made package based off of someone's needs. If someone is going to need 6 to 9 months, right, of rental assistance to move in, a good rapid rehousing program is going to be able to figure out a way to make that work, right?
Right.
And maybe that's not paying a full rental amount from it. Maybe it's paying the full rental amount for 2 months. And then, once someone gets a job, you step that down a little bit next month and a little bit next month. But yeah, so the key is it's not fixed. It's not like a predetermined package it's kind of tailor made for someone's unique needs. So that's one thing. Rental assistance, great. I think, I rental assistance is very intuitive. It makes housing affordable, right?
Yeah.
The second piece is the case management piece. And I think specifically we're talking about what's called housing stability case management. And I think that's different from a lot of other case management that, it has a lot in common with other case management, but it has some kind of unique features. And housing stability case management really focuses on everyone's unique individual housing barriers. And it focuses on those barriers. So like let's say you're working with a client who has, like I said, you can have a client who just needs housing and they're good to go. But you can have a client who has 20 different things they need to work on, whether that is, criminal history, substance use, all of those things. You don't need obviously you don't need to work on all of those in order, right? But where the case management needs to start is on what is a housing barrier, right? Not everything is a housing barrier. So we're looking at, how can we build resiliency in somebody? Right. And I think we often think of we often disregard resiliency as a very important factor in allowing someone to stay housed. So the program doesn't have any arbitrary benchmarks. It doesn't say you must be clean for 6 months or whatever, right? If you want to get clean, we can work on that, right? If you want to go back to school, we can work on that. If you just need a moment just to regroup with a roof over your head and just take a couple weeks just to catch your breath because you haven't had a chance to do that, that's fine, right?
Right.
That's okay. And I think that it's very easy. I think a strong rapid rehousing program is not looking at, okay, what's wrong with you and how can we fix it, right? It's looking at, what's going to prevent this housing from becoming sustainable. And then how can we how can we work from there? If, there's a difference between, smoking pot on weekends and spending all of your money, right, on it. And, you know what I mean? And if you get down to it, what does a landlord want? They want someone who pays the rent on time. They want someone who's a good neighbor and who's going to take care of the unit, right? Yeah. And hopefully is a long-term tenant. And so those are the things the case managers are working on.
And so I thank you for that. And so that basically Becky is pretty thorough when she talks about things. And so yes, housing first. That is what rapid rehousing is about.
Housing first.
And case management, housing stability, what do we call them? Is a
housing stability.
Yes.
Housing stability case management.
Housing stability case manager. And so that's definitely something that those two factors need. Now, we have some questions and I'm going to ask them.
Absolutely.
And so let me ask you a question. We know that this money comes from somewhere. So what government entity provides this money?
Yeah, so most of the money that goes to rapid rehousing comes from HUD. But keep in mind that rapid rehousing is a project model. It's not a funding source, right? It's not basically different grants come in and they fund rapid rehousing projects the same way they would fund a homeless shelter, the same way they would fund a drop-in center. And so the majority of rapid rehousing funds come directly from the federal government from HUD. So in the state of Maryland, we have 5 what are called entitlement districts. Those are counties that are larger metropolitan areas. It's Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel, Montgomery, and Prince George's County. Get money applied directly to the federal government on behalf of that, on behalf of their entitlement jurisdiction, and get the funds directly. For Frederick and the rest of the state, our office, DHCD, basically distributes it to those counties. In the past, it's typically based off of a couple of factors: population size, other related factors. In the past, they actually were competitive. There was like a competition for those funds. The past 2 years, though, due to COVID, we've basically level funded and kind of kept the funding levels the same.
Right.
Yeah, just because COVID's changed a lot in terms of how things work.
Now, when you have the funding, now I know you're not on the money side, but when it
I'm not
comes
on the money side. So.
how it like, how do we get the money into our city? Is it a city and state collaboration? So our city, like our city council and state council, like how is that working to get the money? Like we know we're not going to be an entitled city because we don't have a more urban metropolitan area. So
the most beautiful downtown.
we do. So how does that work in with city and state? How does that happen?
Yeah. So local communities form what are called continuums of care. And that's kind of a collaboration between government, nonprofit, private citizens, our members, and most, continuums of care have people with lived experience of homelessness on them as well, so that they can have a seat at that table as well. So those continuums of care, so every county, and in some cases, so like there's a mid-shore and a lower shore continuum of care. So it's, 3-4 counties together form one continuum of care, and the funding is distributed to those continuums of care. So,
and so I'm glad you said that word because we worked with both of them. So we had Continuum Care and ESG. So tell me about those two. They're really
yes.
I know it's very complex. So
I will not get into the complexities. But I love
the difference. Right. I did love learning the difference between the two. So, and we were able to utilize that with tent cities and leverage that. Tent cities a whole other topic.
Well, yeah, that was a whole other topic. No, but I remember these were our copious emails back and forth where we were just like, well, with ESG funds you need to fill out this form, and with CSC funds you need to fill out this form. It gets very complicated when you get into the weeds of it, and this is what happens when you deal with lots of different funding sources. So continuum of care. So to kind of clarify, continuum of care refers to two different things. It refers to the continuum of care grant, which is granted to continuums of care, but also to the entity that is formed for the continuum of care. So when we're talking about continuum of care, we're either talking about the entity of like the Frederick County Continuum of Care, or the COC. This is the acronyms that I find myself accidentally slipping into, right? So that local continuum of care, and then there is a continuum of care grant, which is given to those continuums of care. But the other one, which is the ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant, is also granted to the continuum of care as well. So they still play an integral part in implementing both of those funding sources. So think COC, the entity, and then COC, the grant, right? Those are two different things. But COC, the entity, right, works with COC, the grant money in order to implement these programs. So they are two different funding sources that both fund rapid rehousing. They're different because they are created by two separate acts of Congress, right? That that are designed to fund homelessness. There are some very slight differences that I don't think is worth going into. Things like whether COC is must sign a year lease. ESG doesn't have to be a year lease. Like a lot of these like very specific program details that I would say normally when we're working with providers on a case by case basis, it's have a standard model between that's used for both ESG and COC. But maybe if ESG can provide more flexibility, if you need that flexibility, you can use it. But if from the perspective of a client going through the system, the programs are virtually identical. It's more of a matter of the niche eligibility when placements are happening. It's like I said, it's very technical.
And so I know that Frederick, like I said, we have high prices in our rentals. So it's like you're not going to find, like in Baltimore, we could find like a $600, $800. You cannot find nothing like that in Frederick. So that is very disturbing for me, because then I'm like, how are we going to get rid of this homeless population if we cannot put somebody in using rapid rehousing money with a $1,200 rent, right? So like you said, we might need to do roommates and say
Yeah.
600. So, but that is just a way of knowing how to work with the program, right? So how do you feel like do you feel like rapid rehousing is decreasing the homeless population, and how do you see how it's been effective?
It is. It definitely does decrease the homeless population. I think it's important to recognize that rapid rehousing works as kind of as a single program in an ecosystem of other programs, right? That work together to resolve homelessness. So like rapid rehousing is not appropriate for every single client that comes through the door.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I would, as a believer in it, would say it's appropriate for most. But it's not necessarily appropriate for everybody. Not everyone's long-term goal is to get into market rate housing. People with long-term disabilities, right? Seniors, for instance, getting into employment and into market rate housing may not be the goal for somebody in that situation. And I think high rental prices are always a concern, right? You work in the ecosystem you work in. And yeah, I think what you mentioned in terms of, finding roommates in some cases, it's, in some cases, if it's a large family that you can't get roommates for, it could be placing them outside the jurisdiction as a last resort, right? It's not something we typically like to do, but those are options that are available. But a lot of the time it's working within, it's working within the context of that ecosystem. So, and it has to also, people who create and build and finance housing also need to be at the table for that too.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question about is it successful? Because that's the real question, right? Is it successful? And I think what we're seeing is yes, right? Across the board. So I am shamelessly pulling this data from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They have all the national data, right, on rapid rehousing. I would actually recommend you go to their website, National Alliance to End Homelessness. Yeah. Lots of if there's something, I read them to get the cutting edge on things for reference, right? I do this full time, and they're my bookmarked,
And you can definitely if you want to put it in that comment, you can put the national line, and then people could our viewers can definitely look it up for themselves, because we have some viewers. April Sandy is one of those people. I'm gonna give a shout out to April. She has been working with the homeless population in Frederick for a long time, and so she would definitely want to see some of that information. And we have other viewers that will definitely be tuning in later. Like I said, my video is always there, so it doesn't go anywhere, and so they would definitely want to see that information. So yeah, I will put it up.
Yeah, so I just sent you the link. But yeah, so from them, and this is looking at national data, and I think it's important to look at national data as well, because it is going to include. State of Maryland has a lot of different, has urban, suburban, rural, right? And if you're looking at success rates of this kind of program, you need to see it in all those different models. Mm-hmm. Thank you for. So what National Alliance has found, for instance, is that families enrolled in rapid rehousing exited shelter an average of 2 to 3.2 months faster than those who were referred but did not enroll. So maybe they chose that they weren't interested. So it moves people out of shelters faster. Now, this is where we get to the rapid rehousing, right? And I think there's this kind of assumption that when you hear the word rapid, you think that there's keys waiting around, right? Waiting to give to someone. This is, and I think it's clear, this is rapid, but it is still a permanent housing. It's still finding a lease, finding a landlord, signing a lease, moving in. So it's still working on the rental market timeline. It's and rapid rehousing is not designed to be an emergency response, right? If someone is going to lose their housing tonight, right? That's what the emergency shelters are designed for. Emergency shelters are designed to be that short term. Someone's having a crisis, they need someplace to go right now that's available immediately. That's that emergency services side of it. That's street outreach. That's that's hoteling. Some jurisdictions use money for hotels. That is emergency shelters. Rapid rehousing is housing, right? It is that getting someone out of homelessness and after we've responded to the crisis, moving from there.
I think it was like a 3-month process. It was pretty, yeah, it's like a 60-day process. I think I gave my case manager like 60 days or something like that, 60 days to get have them housed. So I did it like 10 days,
Yeah, and I think that timeline across the state is speeding up a bit now that there's more money to to incentivize landlords to sign on. And I think one of the challenges is that you need that strong network up front. Right. Like if you have a client at your doorstep and you don't know any landlords to call, you're on Craigslist, right? Trying to find someone. And that's, you need to have that network. And unfortunately, with a lot of programs, they're in a really tough spot because they have to build that network as they go, right? They have, and need to kind of lean on that network. And hopefully, I mean, I think it's unfortunate, but the 50th client that they serve through their program is going to be benefiting from that knowledge, that the programs have kind of put through. It's hard to gain that knowledge. And I just want to be clear, like running a rapid rehousing program is a very difficult thing to do, right?
Yeah,
it is not an easy, you've seen this firsthand. It is not an easy program to run. No. You have to tailor make packages of housing for everyone. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a fill out this form, right? It is really
not a checkbox.
Yeah, it's a motivational interviewing, like really kind of work with someone's unique needs, get someone where they need to go. So anyway, back to statistics, because you know how much I love statistics.
I know you love statistics.
I'm the worst. But I'm such a data nerd. I love it. Anyway. So 77% of families that enrolled in rapid rehousing did not return to shelter. I think that's the one
huge
thing.
Number. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like if you're looking at families who enroll in rapid rehousing, 77% do not return to shelter. Right. And I think that's the key thing. It increases household self-sufficiency. So like if you're referred to rapid rehousing, those who are referred, their incomes are 10% higher than those who go through the system normally. And I think this is the key point when you're thinking about not just what is effective from an individual perspective, but what is effective at scale, right? Because there's a big difference between you can resolve homelessness by taking your $1 million budget and giving it to one person, right? Like I will guarantee you that one person is not going to become homeless again. Probably. Right. We don't know. Right. I won't guarantee. I would put money on it though. Not $1 million. Right. But like, how do you distribute this money equitably? And I think the key is that you balance, right? If giving one person $1 million is a 100% chance, giving two people $500,000 is a 99% chance, right? You have to work within those margins of and percentiles. And I think that's hard because we are talking about humans and human life.
Right.
Right. But when you're looking at systemic operation, you do have to kind of think from that perspective. And so I think the numbers speak for themselves, right? So like a family can be rapidly rehoused with a 77% success rate for $6,500, right? Like that's how much it would cost to get someone into housing, right?
Yeah. Say that number again. Say that like that. Just that 6,000.
Yeah, 6,500. 6,578.
So that's like a drop in the bucket, like
in terms of a budget. Well, not just that, but like think about how much it costs just to keep someone in shelter. Right? Like it's more to keep someone in shelter.
Yes, that is more money to keep someone in shelter than the house.
Not to mention emergency room costs, not to mention like if you're looking at like, this is not the way I look at things, but if you're just like, listen, I want to spend the least amount of money on resolving homelessness as possible, this is
it.
Right. And obviously we want people to spend all of their money on resolving homelessness because that's what we love and we're passionate about. But it's much more affordable. So let's compare the $6,578 on average for national average, right? To house a family in rapid rehousing. That same family going through a transitional housing program would be $32,000, right? And so the goal with rapid rehousing is looking at those numbers. And this is not to say transitional housing is not a good program. It is a good program for some people.
Yeah.
Right. It can be very effective for certain populations, for people who have very specific needs.
Right.
I've worked a lot with transitional housing programs that, veterans, especially people with people. And some people just want that kind of model, right?
I manage transitional housing, so it is a lot different. Like
it is a lot different. But when you're looking at scale, right? that's kind of that is what rapid rehousing, and this is why HUD has been leaning on rapid rehousing more and more and more as more money is kind of coming through, is that, you can house with a pretty good success rate for a pretty low amount of money. And I think it really comes down to that, like, it's very surprising that once you give people money, right? Once you give someone a roof over their head, a lot of other things kind of start magically falling in place. Not all the time, not every time. And I think it's okay, right? Like I tell programs this all the time. Like, some people, it's okay if it takes someone 2 attempts to, to be successful in rapid rehousing, right? Like, they would have spent that time in a shelter if they had to wait. You know what I mean? Anyway, and like, that's still a success story. People need different amounts of time. People need different amounts of resources. So veterans numbers are very similar. So veterans, it's 73% of veterans, including 67% of veterans who had 0 income when they moved into rapid rehousing, did not return to shelter. And then 93% of veteran families and 88% of single adults did not return to shelter in at least a year. That's kind of the spectrum that they're looking at.
So everybody, you guys are hearing these numbers, right? Like, rapid rehousing definitely does work. It
does. And I will say, and I think looking at the aggregate is really important, because it's very easy to see an anecdote from that, 25% or whatever number I just said, right? That it wasn't successful for, and think that means that the program is not a good program. Right. Just because a program's not made for every single person doesn't mean that it's not a good program. And I think that's a really important thing to think about legitimately. It is that like, we still need other models. We still need what we call permanent supportive housing, which is, for people with disabilities who's going to need like a voucher or something long term. But the truth is, we can't, using vouchers, like most permanent supportive housing program requires people have disabilities, and I think the logic of that is
the vouchers have stipulations.
They have a lot of stipulations.
They have a lot of barriers and stipulations. So vouchers is not always the answer because of all those barriers and stipulations. And then for you to have the vouchers to work, you gotta find yourself taking away some of those stipulations just to use a voucher. And then are you now crossing lines of, is this legally you do that?
Well, I think one of the challenges with vouchers is that you have to keep creating new vouchers, right? Because, like, you need a mechanism. You can, if you have 50 people and you put them in vouchers exclusively, it's like I said, it's a very, and vouchers 100% have their place in the homeless services, and they have a prominent place, right? It is still the standard model, right? 99% success rate in a voucher-based model, right? But one of the things that, we've experienced, I'm sure you've seen when you were working in Baltimore City as well, is that you'll have all these vouchers and then they fill up, right?
And then they fill up,
and they stay full, right? And so,
and then there's no more vouchers.
There isn't, it's hard, and I think that and I think that doesn't mean we don't need more vouchers, right? We do need more vouchers. That doesn't mean that it's not. It is a very good model to keep housing affordable, but it's not a one size fits all program either. And so when you're designing your homeless services system, you're thinking about, like, all right, we have this amount of vouchers, we have this amount of rapid rehousing, we have this amount of transitional housing. How do we use these different models based on what we know about our population? Right. We know, for instance, we have, I don't know what it is for Frederick on the top of my head, but, like, let's say 12% of your homeless population is families. You look at, like, what do we know about family homelessness? How can we, use that data in order to make decisions about how to use these different program types appropriately?
Now you had mentioned, so if it doesn't work, that 20% is not a good program. Now, when I was working in Baltimore, we had different entities that you were using rapid rehousing, and so tell me, I want you to share, like, how I know it was a grant. You said there was a grant side. How can what is the requirements for other agencies to have a rapid rehousing in their program, in their agency?
So again, rapid rehousing is just a model, right? Like, fundamentally, and it's a model that's designed with this very specific package of services and housing. It is not a funding source, right?
Right.
It is a model that receives, so like local funding, and the state does, we at DHCD do this too, right? Like we, will fund local, local programs with rapid rehousing that's not through the federal government. And so like rapid rehousing can be created from any source of funds. It doesn't have to be this like ESG, COC, to use more acronyms, right? Pockets of money. A lot of different grants can fund it, but specifically when you're looking at like these, this money that's coming from HUD specifically for these program types. And like I said, I'm 2 months into my position at DHCD from the city, right? So like I have not only worked very smallly with Frederick CSC, so I don't want to. I don't know enough to say how it works on the individual level, but a lot of those decisions are made in collaboration with us and with and with the COC. So I don't have a lot of great information for you, just because.
Well, I'm glad that you're now at the state level. So now I know you'll possibly work with Frederick somehow. So I'm very confident that if you're in the mix, it's gonna go well.
That's very kind of you. Yeah, like I said, I'm still new. And here's the thing, and I say this a lot, right, is that like I worked in Baltimore City for 8 years, right?
Right.
And it's very easy when you're working in one jurisdiction to take what you've learned from that jurisdiction and think it's applicable across the board, right? And I'll say a lot of it is, right? There's a lot of commonality, a lot of commonality between a lot of different jurisdictions, right? But I think the worst thing, because like my job is right now to work with individual communities on improving their rapid rehousing programs and spending a lot of the new CARES Act funding, rapid rehousing dollars, because those got slotted into those existing infrastructure. But the truth is, like, the last thing I want to do is to come in with all my Baltimore City assumptions to a community that has its own unique needs, right? And so so that's why I say, right, in terms of talking about things going on at the community level, I'm 2 months in to learning how the rest of the state works. So I appreciate your patience with me, and as I've been learning that myself. But yeah, no, I'm very excited to work more. I go to Frederick all the time.
Yay! Well, when you come to Frederick, you definitely we gotta link up and we can eat lunch.
Absolutely. You guys have the best pizzas made with pretzel dough I've ever had. Am I not supposed to? Is that bad? Is that like?
No, it's not. You will come to Frederick.
I'm not making any endorsements. This is not us.
You will come to Frederick, eat the freshest food, the best food, the great. Everything is good in Frederick. So we definitely are very welcome to know that you're going to be working at the state level and that you could help the homeless population in Frederick, because that is something that is a big topic in Frederick, and making sure that the families get housed. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you know how many families have been housed in the Maryland level through rapid?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. Mostly because it is a program model, right? I can look at state data of the states that are included. So like the numbers that I have are just like the state pockets of funds, and don't include those entitlement districts, which are like most of the funds, right?
Right.
So like, I will say overall, like, in the state of Maryland, we have 30,000 individuals who touch the homeless system in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's across the board. Touching the system could mean that they go to shelter for one night and then they move off somewhere else. Right. That's kind of what we're looking at, that 30,000 touch the system in total. Like I said, it's a hard number to get. We are so right now, like the last piece of data, because I looked through all the numbers but we're looking at from FY20, right? That's our last
the last one,
data, right? FY20, which is really July 2019 to June 2020, right? So this is pre-pandemic. When levels were a lot lower than they are now. It was 2,200 individuals served just from state funds, not any of those other funding sources that contribute to it. So that's the number I have. It's not a great, it's a bad statistic, and I apologize. It's kind of
that is definitely something that I just wanted to know myself, because I wanted to see like how many were, and we possibly can get better numbers when you like shrink it down to like cities and counties and things like that.
It gets complicated, and I will say that, like, you know, in terms of the success rate, you know, in Maryland we tend to meet and or beat the national success rate for rapid rehousing. So, like, in terms of how it's being implemented, I would say it's being implemented well. But again, no strategy is 100% successful, right? Every strategy has a failure rate.
And I mean, like, I remember going to the trainings and we had California there, and it was just like, wow, like the homeless population and how different, like you said, it's a program model, and how everybody used the program differently is not the same across the board. And so, and it definitely depends on what agency has the program. So we do have, you'll see that we do have not so many shelters in Frederick, but we have different ones, or we or entities that deal with the homeless population in different ways. And so I would hope that a lot of the agencies in Frederick would adopt the rapid rehousing model and finding ways to get funding to use it. So, and I mean, it's like you said, it's a model, but the funding that is also a part of it also. So, and getting that money to use the rapid rehousing program. So, Becky, I want to say, like, one, you were very informative. I love it. I love when, because I always learn from you every time, thinking like, because I learned a lot through those emails. I was going directly to Becky, like, Becky, I need help. I don't know what to do.
I was also one of those people who like read a book in every email. It was very annoying. And as I hope all of your viewers can deduce from my personality, right? In terms of long-windedness is something I need to work on.
No, but it's very informative. I think you probably touched on some things that people were wondering about of how it works. And because I really think that one thing that metropolitan cities have that a lot of like Frederick like area is that people skill of meeting them where they're at. Right. That is so important because like you said, every hat is different. Nobody's going to look the same. And you can't be like, oh, you're homeless, so you want to be homeless. And that's what it is. It's like, that's not the attitude to have. It's like housing first. If the house is not over the roof's head, they can't go get a job. If they don't have a roof over their head, they can't go, go get a school, go get a degree or a certificate. They can't do all those things if we don't put a roof over their head. And then that's when mental health comes into play. That's when substance abuse comes into play. Oh, wow. I have a
I'm surprised you haven't heard my toddler. So,
it's a survival thing, and so a lot of people think like, oh, they have a substance abuse, that's why they're homeless. When reality is they probably started that substance abuse when they became homeless, when that mental became very real when they became homeless. So it's the fact that if we can get roofs over our people's head in the community, all those things might take care of itself.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to think about just like, we talk a lot in the homeless services world about vulnerability, right? What are the different vulnerabilities that exist? But one of the things we don't talk about enough is resiliency, because there's a lot of resiliency in the community. And I think one of the things that's just important to remember is that, like, how can we foster an environment of resiliency? Right? How can we build resiliency into people? Because I think about this in my own life, right? Like, I can take certain punches, right? Like I can have a big doctor's bill that the insurance doesn't cover, and I can maybe afford that out of pocket, but like, what if I get another one? What if I get 3 of them, right? Like, you can only handle so many punches, right? And I think it's very easy to look at somebody when after they've gotten kind of beat up by the world around them and kind of make assumptions about them, right? It's very easy to do that. But again, I think I hope people don't make assumptions about who I am based on how I was at my worst, right? At my lowest of low. And I think that's something, when you're encountering and working with people who are in tough spaces, is just realize that, as human beings, they are more than that space, right? They're more than who they are in that space.
And I thank you for that. So, Becky, It was a pleasure, and it was so good to see
Thank you so much for
again.
having me.
And hopefully I will see you again in Frederick. So, and in other areas also, I'm pretty sure that we'll see each other again.
I come up relatively frequently to take my daughter to the bookstore, really. It's,
really? What bookstore do you go to?
The Curious Iguana.
Yes.
So they've got a really cute little children's section back. So yeah.
They do. Yeah. I love that place. So thank you so much for giving us all this great information.
Absolutely.
And I really thank you for that. And you did a great job. And hopefully we'll see you in Frederick with our rapid rehousing program and expanding it and making it a great program in Frederick because we need it. And so, yeah. So
I really appreciate it.
And now you get to go spend time with that beautiful baby.
I know. Maybe I didn't miss that time. We'll see.
And your one day you took time out for me. Becky's in law school, guys. So my hat goes out to her. She wears a lot of hats, and you're doing a great job at it. So that's great power, attitude. You have a great night, Becky. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.